Okay, great. Well, then I would say just a few words to welcome everyone. As usual, this is the final installment of our series, which I hope kept you company, and it was enriching both for speakers and audiences. And we are very lucky to end on a good note. Very intimate participants, but I know the paper is of very high quality with Gábor Förköli, who is a assistant professor in the Department of Hungarian and Cultural Study, Hungarian Literature and Cultural Study at the ELTE in Budapest. Also, collaborates with the ERC project of Valentina Lepri in Warsaw at the Polish Academy of Sciences, no students. And Gábor is very well known to our Scientiae community, one of the most hardworking, prolific authors in our community. And in fact, just to give you an idea, in the last few months, I read just a few of his articles and essays, which I think would make a good introduction to his intellectual compass. One is about copia and historical note taking in academic environment, and then another one actually different about natural philosophy, chemical atomism, and in Lutheran orthodoxy. This appeared in the journal Galileana of last year. And then moving forward, there was a chapter that I much enjoyed, which appeared at Brill co-edited by one of my old friends, Justina, also in Poland. And this chapter by Gábor was about the perception of writing practices and intellectual property in early modern Hungary. And more recently, at least for me, as far as the things I read, there was also an article in the Journal of Jesuit Studies of this year entitled Inside Jesuit Classroom Student Notebooks from the Austrian Province of the late 16th Century. So with Gábor, we have an expert of intellectual property, manuscript studies, note-taking, various aspects of intellectual scholarship. And I think this is a great conclusion of a series which was intended to do exactly that, look at history of scholarship in a global dimension. And the title of his paper today, as you see in the screen, is Commonplacing Paroemiology and Knowledge Management at the Lutheran Gymnasium of Strasbourg in the 1580s and 90s. Gábor, take it away.
Thank you very much for these generous words. And thank you all of you for being here. And I apologize that I couldn't attend the other sessions of this seminary, but I had a class to teach. Um, can you see now my presentation in full screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. It's not full screen.
Not for me.
And okay. So, and can you see that I am moving forward with my slides? No?
No.
No. Okay, so I just stop sharing and I start sharing again. Okay. Uh, okay, so what about now?
Still not the full screen.
Mhm. Okay, I mean, I will just scroll down. Okay. So but can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I will just scroll down. Okay. So sorry about that. I don't know what happened.
That's fine.
So, okay. Um, so in my paper, I will discuss early modern printed lexicons and student notebooks as commonplace books. Commonplacing was a simple technique to organize excerpts and notes with subject headings. Humanist educators such as Rudolphus Agricola and Erasmus emphasized that excerpts carefully chosen and written down under the proper headings should be revised by students so that they can memorize them. However, the sociologist Alberto Cevolini argues that the retrieval tools of printed and manuscript commonplace books have become more sophisticated and reliable over time, such as indexes and headings. So their purpose changed. They assisted less and less the memorization, and they became instead forgetting machines. I think many of you already knows his collective volumes that he edited, which bears the title Forgetting Machines. Once something was written down and its localization was secured by a well-chosen heading or a proper keyword in the index, there was no longer need to learn it by heart. In my paper, I will argue that the commonplacing tradition of Johann Sturm's Lutheran Strasbourg, which fertilized lexicography and paroemiology, so the study of phraseology and proverbs, represents a transitory phase between learning and forgetting. So this is my first actual slide. I hope you can see it. Okay. So I will start with a quotation from the Classical Letters, a collection of erudite epistles by Johann Sturm, which constitutes a remarkable source for studying his pedagogy. He wrote to Heinrich Stirner, teacher of Ninth, about the learning of vocabulary in the following terms, I quote, "But besides the exercises on endings, so the inflection of Latin words, it is necessary to strive ceaselessly to get the pupils to expand their vocabularies of everyday objects that impinge upon human awareness. Let nothing that can be seen in the human body, nothing of cattle, nothing that is in the kitchen, in the wine cellar, in the granary, or that can be brought to the daily meal, nothing that can be seen in the garden, no fruit or tree, nothing in school that is of any utility, nor in the library, or used in church, or having to do with the weather, nothing that does not affect the human senses in daily life be something your pupils cannot say in Latin, at least insofar as the Latin word exists." This extract was so popular amongst lexicographers that it was quoted as a liminary text, at least by two nomenclators. It was the case of the Nomenclatura Rerum by Abraham Zaur and the Monumental Nomenclator Latino-Germanicus by Nathan Cutreus. This latter, who had received his lower education at the school of Sturm, assumed the inspiration of his masters in the introduction, and I quote again, "There have been numerous men, and even the most erudite ones, who had no shame in using the nomenclator of Hadrianus Junius openly and by referring to the author by his name. In this discipline, a useful work was accomplished by Theophil Golius, who was once my teacher at the school of Strasbourg, and who followed the thread of Sturm, which means that everything that exists in the universe is measured to divinity, nature, art, and humanity, in order to rearrange the headings of the nomenclator of Junius in a somewhat more suitable and more appropriate order." Indeed, Sturm's Onomasticon Puerile Argentinense was imitated by Theophil Golius, also known for teaching Aristotelian ethics at the Lutheran Gymnasium. His Onomasticon Latino-Germanicum was provided with a system of headings that followed the above described Sturmian categories, which made a clear distinction between the names of things pertaining to God, the words used to designate God's creatures in nature, the nouns describing humans as beings with bodies and souls, and the things crafted by human industry. The same goes for the structure of the individual notebooks of students. Only by respecting what Sturm calls ordo naturae, the natural order of things, are we able to put commonplacing in the service of philosophy, which is, as Sturm argues in his De Exercitationibus Rhetoricis, a discipline, I quote, that not only imitates nature, but also assists it and very often amends it. As a Protestant who certainly took seriously the devastating effect of original sin on human intellect and the created world, Sturm must have been gifted with a great deal of optimism to believe that by imitating the structure of nature, we can even achieve the ability to correct its shortcomings. This order, and especially the priority of God in the nomenclature, was religiously observed by Zaur, Cutreus, and other compilers. This arrangement of vocabulary did not respect confessional boundaries. In his correspondence, the Orthodox Lutheran Nicodemus Frischlin, the famous poet and educator of Laibach, today Ljubljana, and Frankfurt, harshly criticized Sturm on account of his alleged crypto-Calvinism. Nevertheless, he intended to emulate him in lexicography. In a letter to Ludwig, Duke of Württemberg, Frischlin bitterly observes that Sturm is still in debt with his Ciceronian Thesaurus, although he has received 5,000 guldens for it. And in the competitive spirit, Frischlin remarks that he would compile a similar dictionary at a much lower price. His Nomenclator Trilinguis that broadly followed the system of Sturm. Moreover, the age Sturm, from his retirement of Nordheim, where he had settled down after being removed from the leadership of the school due to these religious altercations, tried to intercede at Karl Lorcher, magistrate of Strasbourg, in favor of the publication of the book. After this unsuccessful attempt, the work was printed in Frankfurt. Sturm's nomenclature was imitated even by the Jesuit Jacob Gretcher in his Nomenclator Latino Graecus, published in Ingolstadt. Matthäus Bader, whose Rerum Naturae Ordo et Series seu Nomenclati Latino Gallico Germanicus, was published in Strasbourg, and it is a very interesting case. He combined this principle with a structure that was shaped after the categories of classical logic. The first book accommodated substances, de primo ente, the things of nature, the nouns pertaining to human and artificial objects, and the second part was dedicated to the accidents, quantity, quality, relations, actions, ubi, quando, relative position or situm esse, and habitus. In addition, the introduction of his book stressed the mnemonic value of studying words in the natural order of things, and this insight was in perfect accordance with Sturm's preference for natural order of things. For the founder of the Strasbourg Gymnasium, and his letter to Stirner suggests, learning new words is described as strolling in a space furnished with familiar objects. What nomenclatures did was only mapping these objects in relation to their role in everyday life and structuring this space according to the hierarchy of creatures. Within Protestant humanism, the career and the pedagogical thinking of Sturm incarnated an epistemological optimism that not only radiated to the lexicographers of Strasbourg, but also determined the practices of excerpting, as we shall see in this case study. Imbued with the spirit of the new dialectic forged by Agricola during his studies at the Collegium Trilingue of Leuven and the Collège Royal of Paris, he was invited to Strasbourg by Martin Bucer, where he founded his famous Gymnasium. Although the institution was raised to the rank of university as late as in 1621, its international reputation has anticipated this title. Sturm's program, developed in his De Literarum Ludis Recte Aperiendis, De Amissa Dicendi Ratione, and De Imitatione Oratoria, can be resumed with its central notion, sapiens atque eloquens pietas, erudite and eloquent piety. This term postulated a firm connection between knowledge and the linguistic prowess deployed to express the contents of this knowledge. A link also affirmed by the predilection of Strasbourg nomenclatures for the natural order of things. The correlation between the richness of expression and the abundance of knowledge could also be translated in religious terms. Linguistic skills contributed to purer and richer doctrine, according to Sturm. Grammar and dialectic provide a better understanding of profane and sacred texts, and rhetoric is capable of the appropriate expression of the linguistically and dialectically revealed truth. In addition to dialectic and rhetoric, Strasbourg scholars worked for these goals by cultivating lexicology, paroemiology, and phraseology. And even after Sturm was removed from the head of his school for his refusal to subscribe to a more religious, rigorously Orthodox Lutheranism at his old age, his colleagues and successors, such as Melchior Junius, Josef Lang, Ludwig Havenreuter, and Johann Benz, continued this tradition by publishing countless printed commonplace books and thesauri. In this pious curriculum, pagan antiquity was turned into the use of Christian eloquence. In the spotlight of imitation practices stood the oeuvre of Cicero as an object of dialectical and stylistic analysis. To this end, the appendix of De Imitatione Oratoria of Sturm offered three kinds of divisions to study the orations of Demosthenes and Cicero, according to their subjects, their arguments, and the figures of speech used in them. In the edition of Sturm and his colleagues, the work of Cicero appeared with ample indexes. Their list includes the edition of Cicero's letters from 1541 and the three-volume collection of his orations with the emendations of Denis Lambin from 1581. This letter is provided with indexes of matters that point towards matters regrouped in 5 categories: philosophy, proverbs, history, grammar, and rhetoric. In addition to these, the first volume ends with an index locorum communium, index of commonplaces, which simply couples different topics with certain speeches of Cicero. For patricide and coerced testimonies, it proposes proroskio. For duties of the magistrate and the hardship of prosecution, in verrem, etc. This index inspired Melchior Junius, who published in 1594 extracts from Cicero's speeches arranged under 21 headings. In the book entitled Ex Marci Tullii Ciceronis Orationibus Loci Aliquot Communes, the first 8 topics were identical with those of the previously mentioned Cicero edition, whereas the rest were invented by Junius himself. For example, he coupled the study of letters with Pro Archia Poeta and the study of religion with De Haruspicum Responsis. How deeply the preoccupation with indexing Cicero determined educational note-taking practices in Strasbourg becomes obvious if one observes the case of a notebook that has survived from this period. It was penned by Péter Révai, a young Hungarian aristocrat who studied in Strasbourg between 1589 and 91, and who would later earn his fame as an official of the Kingdom of Hungary, as a keeper of the Holy Crown, and as a historian. So you can see his works here. After his philosophy studies absolved in the Jesuit College of Vienna, he arrived at Strasbourg, more appropriate for his Lutheran denomination. In the class of Melchior Junius, he was assigned to take part in various rhetorical exercises which appeared in print later. In one of these speeches, his task was to praise Cicero. At some point of the oration, he proposed an ample list of commonplaces which, in the vein of his professor, coupled topics with Ciceronian orations. He categorized the commonplaces into four major classes: philosophy, 18 headings; politics, 18 headings as well; physics, 18 headings, and other subjects, which he called oratorial commonplaces, 40 headings. During his studies, Révai produced a handwritten commonplace book consisting of almost 280 leaves, each dedicated to a specific heading. The excerpts were taken mainly from classics such as Aristotle, Cicero, and Seneca. The apparent half-hazardness of its organization seems attenuated only by the sporadic use of a dichotomous order already advocated by Agricola and Erasmus to treat vices and virtues as couples: prodigalitas, avaritia; magnanimitas, pusillanimitas; superbia, modestia, etc. However, if you look closer, it turns out that there is a pattern in how Révai treats the texts of Cicero in his commonplace book. In fact, he regularly referred to a certain manuscript version of Junius's commonplace division prepared for Cicero's speeches, a book which had not yet been published in print at the time, to my knowledge. Moreover, in the case of quotations from Cicero, Révai's notebook contains a strikingly large number of overlaps with the way he had associated topics with Ciceronian text in his above-mentioned speech delivered in the praise of the orator. So here you can observe some examples like Procruentio, Proroscio, Promilone, under the heading Conscience. As Junius, Johann Benz, author of numerous textbooks on Latin and ancient Greek, tried to regulate in his turn how his students should take note. To this end, he published a booklet of only 55 pages with the title Locorium Communium Comparandi Rerum et Exemplorum Copiae Accommodatorum Genera Quatuor in 1588. Its appendix contains extracts related to commonplacing, so great pedagogical works related to commonplacing: De Copia of Erasmus, De Formando Studio of Rudolf Agricola, and the De Exercitationibus Rhetoricis of Sturm, who rephrased Erasmus's dichotomy between the copiousness of words and things as the abundance of formulae and theses, which terminology was adapted by Benz in the very title of his book. The agenda of Benz was closely related to the Ciceronian studies of Strasbourg, to which he made a clear reference in the introduction of the book, where he enumerated a few subjects that could be discussed by employing quotations taken from Cicero. When Benz claims that Proarchia is a suitable source for the topic of liberal arts, Pro Marcello for clemency, and Pro Plancio for grace, or mercifulness, he echoes the indices and the commonplaces of Strasbourg editions and Strasbourg Scholia for Cicero. Yet, in fact, the headings of the book have been organized according to a principle that leads us back to the starting point of this paper. As the title suggests, the book contains 4 sets of headings, each one for a different discipline: philosophy, theology, dialectic, and rhetoric. Sections are structured on 3 levels. They consist of various parts divided into classes, which is subdivided into the actual headings, the commonplaces or loci communes. More importantly, the topical arrangement of the philosophy section reminds the reader of the nomenclatures dedicated to study of ancient Greek and Latin and organized according to Sturm's ontological categories. The distinction between divine, natural, human, and artificial is crystal clear in this hierarchy, although the first 2 categories have been contracted in part 1. Later I will show you table that roughly represents this threefold structure. The similitude between this conceptual network and the structure of nomenclatures, it is not a coincidence. These very headings, or most of them, had been used earlier by Benz in his monumental Thesaurus elocutionis oratoriae Greco-Latinus novus ex optimum autorum resolutione, a thematic overview of Latin and Greek vocabulary and phraseology based on excerpts from classics and arranged in natural order secundum ordinem naturae. Evidence for the actual use of Benz's nomenclature in excerpting is provided by a student's notebook once again. This is another Hungarian intellectual who studied at Strasbourg, the Hungarian Albert Szenci Molnár, who arrived at Strasbourg in 1592, where he enrolled at the Gymnasium in the next year. He attended the classes of Josef Lang and Johannes Benz. During his studies, he collected books, gathered inscriptions from his Album Amicorum, today considered as lost, unfortunately, and he kept a notebook. This manuscript, representing an immense value for Hungarian literary history, is preserved today in Târgu Mureș, Romania. It contains a commonplace collection that is structured with headings and followed by additional notes with no apparent principle of organization whatsoever. A notebook Scholar Elisabeth de Couto qualified or used the term adversaria for these unarranged or unstructured notebooks. It contains the same manuscript, his autobiography and the diary that he kept until 1617. There are some annotations on institutions of higher education across Europe, and there are some drafts. Decades after his death, the manuscript was acquired under unclear circumstances by Ferenc Pápai Párizs, a physician, a philologist, and lexicographer who would serve as professor at the Calvinist College of Aiud in Romania. As a student, he took the notebook with him to his academic journeys in German and Swiss territories, and not only did he bind additional leaves in the volume to keep his own journal, but he also inscribed new quotations into Szenci Molnár's commonplace collection too. So he added some new elements to the commonplaces of the previous owner. The headings of this letter had been elaborated with great discipline prior to the actual excerpting process, so prior to the actual note-taking, during which the commonplaces began to be filled up with content. To accomplish this, Szenci Molnár closely followed the headings in the philosophy section of Benz's Locorium Communium Genera Quatuor. So here you can see the structures. Actually, so there are like more than 500 commonplaces, in fact, in the notebook. So these are only the higher categories he used to classify quotations. And whenever he considered it relevant, he completed the structure inherited from Benz with the commonplaces recommended for theology in the same textbook of Benz. Szenci Molnár, as later the second owner of the manuscript, Pápai Párizs, fed headings with Latin and, to a lesser extent, ancient Greek quotations. However, this no way means that he limited himself on classical antiquity. On the contrary, he extensively relied on early modern mediators of ancient literature, and especially on the Carminum Proverbialum Totius Humanae Vitae Loci Communis by the Herborn professor Hermann Gernberg. This was an anthology of versified adages which were organized into a short alphabetical encyclopedia covering various fields from human conduct to natural history. Modern authors, in particular those related to the history of humanism in Hungary, such as Antonio Bonfini and Galeotto Marzio, who were active in Hungary, respectively as a historiographer and as a philosopher, are also present in this notebook. Although Saint-Simonaire commends the Commonplace collection as a scholarly exercise, his personal interest directed him towards similar issues of regional or proto-national history of letters. Moreover, as a Calvinist who struggled in a Lutheran environment, which led to his expulsion from Strasbourg in July 1596, he found in communion theology and in the topic of perseverance during persecutions, two subjects which continued to motivate him in note-taking. After leaving Strasbourg and undertaking a journey to Switzerland and Italy, Saint-Simonaire preferred to remain in the Palatinate, which was a Calvinist territory, where he established a close relationship with the French Huguenot exile, the theologian Daniel Toussaint, Daniel Tossanus, whose works were extensively excerpted by him. As text editor, translator, and author, Saint-Simonaire accomplished an indispensable oeuvre in the service of Hungarian Calvinism. While he resumed his studies for a short period at Heidelberg, Herborn, and Marburg, he uninterruptedly continued his publishing activities in the meantime. Benefiting from the financial support of the rulers of the Palatinate and the Landgraviate of Hesse-Kassel, he cooperated with printing shops in Hanau, in Oppenheim, and in a lesser extent in Heidelberg, Nuremberg, and Altdorf. When the Catholic troops captured Heidelberg in 1622, he had been living in the city for 4 years. Under the impacts of the traumatizing occupation, during which he was tortured by mercenaries of the Catholics. Here you can see his chef-d'oeuvre, the Hungarian translation of Calvin's Institute, and in the bottom right corner there is a portrait of the translator, and in the background you can see the author again, but he is like hung up to a torturing device, and he is being tortured by the flame of the torch. So yeah, it's not a it doesn't represent a good artistic quality, but that's the scene that the artist intended to depict. So after this, he moved to Hanau in 1624. In the same year, he decided to settle down in Transylvania. After a detour to Košice, today in Slovakia, where he lived a few years with his family, he achieved this plan in 1627, and he died in Cluj during an epidemic of plague. His editorial oeuvre consists of coherent, interrelated works, first translated by a certain Gáspár Károly and his team. The Hungarian Bible of Calvinist denomination was published with a revised text by Saint-Simonaire twice, first in Hanau, then in Oppenheim. And this time in Oppenheim, he completed with his groundbreaking translation of the Geneva Psaltery, which is still in use by the Reformed Church of Hungary. Before he left German territories for good, he managed to publish the summary of his wide-ranging activity. This is the translation of Calvin's Institutes. The scriptural, liturgical, and doctrinal program was coupled with a conscious linguistic agenda. Proper translation of religious texts needed a Hungarian grammar and reliable dictionaries. First, a Latin-Hungarian and Hungarian-Latin dictionary dedicated to Emperor Rudolf II, then an extended trilingual Latin-Greek-Hungarian vocabulary. The Latin-Hungarian version exercised a considerable impact on Hungarian schooling, as it was revised and republished several times, including the edition of the above-mentioned Pápai Párizs, who was the second owner of Saint-Simon's notebook. It is evident to literature, to researchers, that Saint-Simon's phraseological materials were deeply influenced by Strasbourg paroemiographers. However, an examination of his dictionary in the context of nomenclatures and commonplacing can provide further insights. And this is the last part, I promise, and I can jump to the conclusion. Although the dictionary of Saint-Simon was a modern alphabetical and bilingual lexicon, his correspondence reveals that in the preparatory phase of his work around 1603, so just 1 year before the publication of the first dictionary, he first compiled a thematically arranged nomenclature or onomasticon. That he changed his mind and opted for an alphabetical arrangement can be explained by the numerous models he admittedly followed, such as the Latin-French and French-Latin dictionaries of Robert Etienne and the Latin-German dictionary of Johannes Frisius, not to mention 2 lexicons published in Strasbourg familiar to him, the Latin-German dictionary of Petrus Dasipodius and the trilingual Latin-Greek-German book compiled from Etienne and Frisius by the publisher Theodosius Richel and prefaced by no other than Sturm. However, Saint-Simon's choice also signals a medial turn in his mindset and a shift in the role he ascribed to dictionaries in language acquisition. In the preface of his work, Saint-Simon qualified dictionaries as mute preceptors, mute teachers, who could facilitate language acquisition without the real presence of teachers. Yet, whoever owns a dictionary can tell that it is not all about memorizing the included vocabulary. Of course, dictionaries help students assimilate a language, but they are more than that. They serve as a working device for those who have already achieved a certain proficiency of the language, such as philologists and translators. The difference between assimilating a language and using a dictionary as a scientific instrument is obvious in the anecdote that Saint-Simon shared with the reader in his preface. During his sojourn in Strasbourg, he visited one of his professors, Johannes Pappus, who showed him in his library dictionaries and Bible translations of multiple nations. During the visit, Pappus explained that thanks to these dictionaries, he could appraise the solutions proposed by different translators for the same biblical loci, even in case of vernaculars that he did not master at all. The fact that Saint-Simon knew to the tradition of nomenclatures, as it is attested by his notebook, yet chose alphabetical order in his own lexicon, indicates that he considered dictionaries as research tools and not as merely mnemonic aids. To use Cevolini's terminology, nomenclatures were learning machines, while modern dictionaries were forgetting machines. As for notebooks, shaped after the instruction of bands, they could function as both, and they represent a transitory state. Rather than using an alphabetical order, Benz arranged headings in what he considered to be the natural order of things. Consequently, his students at least had to memorize the structure of keywords with no necessary obligation to learn the quotations themselves. In the case of Saint-Simon, it is worth mentioning that the second user of the notebook, Pápai Párizs, felt necessary to provide the manuscript with an alphabetical index of matters. You can see it on the right side. On the left side, you can see a title page designed by the second owner. He called it tameidion or scriniolum, so a sort of treasure box. So this commonplace book was a treasure box, or a small treasury. As disconnected as Paris was from the tradition of nomenclatures and the methods of Sturm, as someone who lived later, natural order, ordo naturae, was less evident to him and wanted to retrieve information by turning the pages rather than searching in his memory. A short concluding remark is in order. Before the era of computers, the entries of modern dictionaries were collected on cards by using a filing cabinet. The system of filing cabinets was not completely unknown in early modern period, although individual cards have been rarely preserved, unlike handwritten commonplace books. The connection between nomenclatures and excerpting, which appears crystal clear in Strasbourg education, can help us understand in what extent commonplacing prepared scholars to write dictionaries. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you indeed, Gabor. It was great to look at so many examples and to get into the case study aspect of your work, but also on the premise, I mean, that you mentioned when you talked about the relation between topical arrangement and the ontological level as well. We don't have we have time. We don't have too many people left, but I think there is plenty to discuss. So if you want. Please raise your hand or signal some question that you may have. I'm looking at also the chat. Andre, please.
Yes, that's this is a wonderfully rich talk that you've given us today with a lot of material in it. My background is mostly in Middle Ages and the Renaissance, and I'm wondering about the relationship between these commonplace notebooks and so on and so forth, and florilegia, the medieval florilegia, um, which were often substitutes for reading whole books, right? But with these people, can we assume that they were familiar with the sources and that this was just a convenient way of trying to find suitable quotations or however it was that they used them for lectures, pedagogical purposes, perhaps sermons as well?
So, I mean, thank you very much for your kind words and for your questions. So, do I understand your question correctly? So, you are asking if these early modern note takers went back to the original text,
Yeah,
or
and would
they
they assume,
used they
yeah, and would
used.
they assume that their readers were familiar with them?
Mm, mm, mm. Um, I okay. I will give you an answer, and please let me know if I misunderstood your question. Okay, so sorry.
All right.
So I think there is a tendency to use these pre-selected quotations. So to use other commonplace books to find interesting quotations. So there was this versified commonplace book from this Hermann Gernberg from Herborn, uh, and this Galeotto Marzio, who was of course from Italy, but he worked at the court of Matthias Corvinus. Um, so he he also composed a sort of commonplace book. So of course it's the De Promiscua Doctrina, so on mixed subjects. So this is how I could translate the title. This is mostly on natural philosophy, medicine, and a little bit of moral philosophy, and this is also, but so this can be read as a continuous text, but it also can be read as a uh, collection of Latin and Greek quotations, and many Latin or Greek quotations came from that work to the notebook. So yeah, you can see that they continue to use, if not medieval florilegia, but something similar. So yeah, they don't. Okay. But please, I mean, if I didn't answer your questions, let me know, because I'm not sure that.
Well, yeah, there's only could they assume that their users were
Mhm.
familiar with the whole book? As they're citing authors on various topics and so forth. Uh, were
Mhm.
they also familiar with the original sources?
Mhm. Mhm. Um, I well, I mean, if you are speaking about the notebooks, there's a problem. I mean, you ask if they assumed that the reader, but they didn't. I think they didn't assume anything about the readers, because um they were conceived, so those notebooks, for private use.
Ah, okay.
Okay, so uh, and of course, I mean, this is this second notebook is an interesting case, because it had two owners. Actually, there was a third one from the 18th century. Um, and it is very interesting to see that um, this third person from the 18th century uh, did not understand anything about the structure of this notebook.
Uh-huh.
Um, maybe I can show you a picture, but I'm not sure. But uh, hopefully somewhere it's going to be visible. So, yeah, here. So it was not as I suggested, it was not an alphabetical notebook. It was organized according to these ontological categories, so according to the natural order.
Right.
But this third owner uh, tried to use it as an alphabetical notebook.
Hmm.
So he wrote this letter P and T here.
Hmm.
Um, Actually, it's quite funny, because there are not so many words that begins with P and T. But for instance, he put N and E for onto another page, NE, and he wrote something about Nero, the Roman emperor. And it had no connection whatsoever with the already existing content of the notebook. So,
Okay.
uh, so it's yeah, it's I mean, it's not so hard to I mean reconstruct the structure of the notebook, where you have headings, but somehow this person managed to ignore that, and um, so yeah, but I think nobody was expecting an actual successor, or a second owner, except maybe Protestant ministers, who would often give these notebooks to their sons, who used who continued to use them. There are a few examples. Um, So, several generations of Protestant ministers could use the same notebook to uh, uh, to collect materials for preaching. And
Right.
yeah, in that case, we can assume that it was not exclusively a private notebook. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, yeah, but but in that case, I think whether or not um, the user was aware of the origin of these quotations,
Um,
I mean, it's not so relevant. I think they just
Okay,
used
thank you.
it.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you. Um, Other interventions, other comments or questions? Trying to see if there's any sign here or from the chat. Um, So I was curious if you wanted to say something in terms of intellectual context. Is there anything of worth inquiring between the Strasbourg environment and the project of universal libraries? So I'm thinking about the use of nomenclature in a slightly different sense. I mean, I remember a chapter by Paula Molino who wrote recently about the use of these instruments for a purpose of indexing the library and preparing sort of an addendum to Gessner from Vienna to
Mm.
include the library. So, what can be said about this methodology? Are they similar? Is there a cultural sort of shared intellectual lexicon that they use, or is it completely independent?
Yeah, I mean, you have to know that, I mean, most of these nomenclatures are really for beginners. So
Mhm.
most of them are very short, um, uh, uh, thematically classified word list, so to say. A few of them are rather monumental. So a few of them groups a large amount of quotations. For instance, this huge Greek and Latin nomenclatures of bands was something rather monumental. So I think that's and it contained actual quotations from classics, and I think that that could be used for the purpose of bibliography. Um, but most of them are just a shorter list. Um, as for uh, the notebooks themselves, so the handwritten notebooks I mentioned, um, well, there is a, a heading which I like very much, a heading about libraries. And there are some interesting quotations, but I mean, most of them are about the vanity of accumulating too many books. You know, this humanist idea of having only a selected number of works, books that you know to the death, instead of just accumulating books that you will probably never read. But there is also a quotation, uh, and it comes, I think, yeah, it comes from Johannes Aventinus, so the Bavarian uh, 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 historian, and also something from the Magdeburg centuries about the Library of Alexandria and the Library of Constantinople. And actually, he also gives some solid numbers on the books contained in those libraries. Um, and those not numbers are exactly the same as uh, um, uh, Konrad Gessner mentioned in his Universal Bibliography. Um, so I think this Hungarian Calvinist was already aware of these efforts to compose universal bibliographies. And in a sense, he was also a bibliographer himself, uh, because whenever he published a book, um, a dictionary, a psaltery, a Bible translation, or I don't know, a book of congregational songs, etc., he always tried to give a repertory of already existing Hungarian books. Of course, this is just, I mean, maybe a few items, but he tried to um, work also as a bibliographer, um, and then uh, the second owner of this manuscript um, already he can already be considered as a practitioner of Historia Literaria in
Mhm.
Hungary. So he already began to write the history of Hungarian letters, which um, became more and more important later on.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, thanks for reminding also the Seneca, the idea that possessing books is vanity. I mean
Yeah.
it's yeah, to end our series. Well, I have another question which I suppress for now. I can also ask you later, but I want to know if there's others who want to intervene. We still have a few minutes. Vladimir's probably went to his Christmas
Mm.
party. So, but oh no, he's still
Yeah,
there.
he's still here.
I'm actually back here. And by the way, I wanted to ask as well a little question, just out of curiosity. You mentioned this topos of vanitas, vanity of accumulating too many books, and I'm just curious whether um, another very frequent topos, I mean early modern topos related to the flood of books, whether it
Hmm.
appears in the handwritten notebooks you mentioned,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
flood of books and how to deal with it.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
The
So this
the
Coquia
inform
Librorum. I mean,
Yes.
yeah, I mean not so much. I mean, only this idea of vanity, um, and uh, yeah, I think scarcity of books was a bigger issue for them. So
Hmm.
I mean, yeah.
Okay.
So sorry, I mean, maybe it's not a very satisfying answer, but no, not so much.
No, it was just an idea to what extent, the whole concept of nomenclators and
Mm.
various kinds of indexes, etc., might appear uh, or might be related to this idea of the flood of books and how to
Hmm. Hmm.
navigate through this enormous amount of books which appeared, of course, from printing presses of the 16th century. So I was curious whether some of your authors related this idea to the very production of nomenclators, indexes, etc., etc.
So no, that there's no, I mean, no direct reference. I think they were aware of the problem, but there's no direct reference. It's rather about the scarcity of books. So why
Okay.
don't we have as many dictionaries in Hungary or in Transylvania as they have in Western Europe? So that's that was the big issue, of course.
Mhm.
Well, maybe I ask very quickly that I have a
Mm.
curiosity. Given the role of Ciceronian orations for this tradition, is there something there that sort of suggested these authors to use a kind of to make a list of arguments pro and contra? Because many orations, I mean, are discussed just in terms of producing essentially like testimonies or something that could be used, I mean, in sort of in utramque partem, if you will,
Mhm, mhm, mhm,
so
mhm.
to praise or blame. And I wonder if because Cicero in this circle and that you discuss Sturm and so on, is there something there that is worth pursuing, or is it just an off idea?
Hmm. Uh, yeah, I think that they were very pragmatical on that level. So yeah, I mean, uh, yeah, that can be uh, interesting thing to check um, in the indexes of those notebooks, whether there are some possibility of contradictions or yeah. Uh, I think there is something about marriage, which was of course a classical case of uh, uh, um, um, rhetorical training. It's the famous progymnasmata contains a question whether we should get married or not, and yes, there are they I mean not maybe not related to Cicero, but there are some contradictory arguments under the heading marriage, which is quite strange from a Protestant, but they somehow played with the both possibilities. Um, and there is another work I forget to mention. This is a symposium of Bonfini. Uh, so he was not only a historian, but he wrote also a work, this symposium about marriage, whether marriage or chastity is superior, and this is a dialogue, and it is present in this notebook. So so yeah, there are some cases, but it is also very confessional. So as I said, uh, the interpretation of Lord's Supper was a very crucial question. So this Hungarian person got expelled because of that. So you just had to be careful.
Yes, makes sense. Makes sense. Well, I mean, it would be wonderful to have more time to expand. No, I know the work of Cesare Vasoli on like Vermigli and so on. It's another, I mean, direction. But I think there's a lot. You have produced a very rich series of materials, which I think it was a fitting conclusion to our series. And so I suppose we can sort of bring it to a close. And I want to thank everyone who has been with us from the beginning, especially Vladimir, for just one more chance for us to be together to try to do something together. Also for Andre, who didn't miss a single I mean, of our reunions here. And really just wishing best of holidays. I see, we have seen a lot of friends in this period, so we will be in touch. And I don't know if you, Vladimir, want to say more.
No, just just repeat what you have said already. Just many thanks to all of the participants of this seminar. It was a wonderful intellectual experience for all of us, I believe, and we have some plans with Stefano for some publication plans, which we have to discuss first, and then we will be back in touch with all speakers.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your attention and for your questions. It was really nice to be here with you.
Thank you, Gábor. Thanks.
Thank you, Gab. Okay, well then, yeah, I guess till soon. I mean, till next time, and yeah, I wish all the best, and to everyone who is here, and also to the other ones who followed all the way until here, and yeah, so uh, that's all for now.
Yes. Well, best to you all for the new year.
Yes, the same, and Merry Christmas.
Yeah. Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Bye bye.
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 Bye.